First I knew about this was Jason. He stood up, shouted down the office to me and says, "Chris, we need you to race an ARRMA infraction against an AMG G63 Mercedes, a quarter-mile drag race."
Our boss, Jason, sent me like a little task to do some research into how fast could we do, or did we think we could do, a quarter mile with one of our cars.
My response to that was initially, what? And then, of course, yes, everyone loves a drag race, so why not?
We used a stock infraction, but we put the spool out of the limitless in. This was to help us get the tool gearing required for high terminal velocity. We weren't so much bothered by acceleration, just we needed top speed. But other than that, we used pretty much stock infraction. We used our ATES system out of the Kraton platform and the motor and speed control out of that.
That vehicle was not public or announced at the time, so to a certain degree we were a little bit quiet as to what exact power system was in there. We just kept it generic and said it was an ATES system. But now we can actually reveal to you that it was the Kraton ATES system that was in that car, the exact same one that powers the Kraton ATES, fits straight into the ARRMA infraction.
We didn't know how many runs we were going to be doing throughout the day, although we did runs with the 6S system, which comes stock in the infraction. If we'd have been doing like 20, 30 runs, we didn't know, so we just needed an almost bulletproof system that you could just keep putting in and going and going and going, and that has a really good heatsink and fan on it. So just keeping the car cool. I mean, we were going into areas that we haven't done per se as a company, so we were kind of pushing our own power system to somewhere that probably we hadn't tried putting it before.
We had no idea what we were going to be doing for the filming on the day, so we needed to build a car that was super reliable, that could run 100-mile-an-hour speeds all day long. We used the stock SRS 6000 receiver, the stock ADS15M servo. The radio system we used in the vehicle was a Spektrum DX5R. This allowed us to tune the AVC to a more detailed level. We chose not to use the limitless because Carwow wanted us to have something that was more representative of a real-life road vehicle. So for them, I think the truck was something that they preferred to see racing against their G63.
First I'd found some data on the G63 so we could find out just a figure, and we found out it was like 12.4, but searching a little bit more found some quite in-depth GPS data. So I was able to freeze frame every second and work out their distance. So it's nice to be able to get a plot of the distance and how they covered it in the 12.5. So we're able to map out G63's run, and then going online again and looking at our ARRMA guys. Got a really good fan base on YouTube, but they were doing 100 miles an hour, so we could work out the G they put on the G loading, so we knew how fast our car was accelerating. And from that, some simple math, we had a good idea that we should get off the line quicker. But how much further would we be, or could we be in front, and when were they going to catch us? Or were they going to catch us? We didn't know. So once we had the data for both cars, we then realised that it's going to be possible. I think our main concern was how long we were going to be holding on to full throttle, and how repeatable it was going to be. Was it like a one-shot run? Would your batteries be flat enough, or how much would you have taken out of a battery? So there's a lot of repeatability that we had to go and do. So planning it out in practice or on graphs is one run, but then it's doing it repeatedly and surface. There's still quite a few unknowns, even after doing it on paper. But once we realised, yeah, this is possible, so let's go ahead and go and have a go at testing and go and test this somewhere.
We had no idea what the running surface would be like, so we actually set the ride height quite high on the vehicle, put a lot of preload on the shocks so that it would stiffen the car up, and then we made sure with setup that the rake of the chassis was slightly nose down. In speed runs, when you're doing 100 miles an hour, you don't really want the rear to be lower than the front. Any air going under the car is dangerous for the car to take off.
It had to pull in a straight line. We didn't want it weaving all over the road, so put it on a setup board, camber, tweak. Sounds a little bit anal, but we wanted to make sure we could do it straight out of the box.
We soon realised that the quarter mile in public testing is not possible. We also needed to make sure that we brought something reliable to the Carwow shoot so that Carwow have an interesting race. Part of the reason they wanted to bring us into this drag race was they knew we had a fast car, and we wanted to show the world what our RC cars can do. We'd been to Bruntingthorpe before, so we got back in contact with them. We knew they had the facilities that we needed to test out our car. They've got a half-mile Indy motorway. This was the perfect location for us to be able to safely test our vehicle and actually try and figure out how we can make this race happen. The quarter-mile drag race actually is incredibly difficult. It's a long distance to drive an RC car over. We're doing high speeds, really high speeds, from launching from a standstill as well. That's the difference to a normal speed run. We're not just looking to do a high top speed. We need to launch really hard, hit the high speeds towards the end of the quarter mile, and keep it going in a straight line. On the test day, we started out slow. We just did some launches from a standstill, some short drag runs, tuning the AVC to be optimal for keeping the car in line during the launch, but not being too oversensitive at the higher speeds. This is where we tuned it individually on the DX5R radio.
At Bruntingthorpe, we measured out. We had to go and measure out the quarter mile first, and then at the end of, after rolling it out with the trundle wheel, turn around and looking and seeing Stu and Chris dots in the distance. Oh wow, that's quite a long way, a lot further than you think. And even then at that point, there's not much curvature, and the car was a dot. It's
a really, really long way. It's beyond the visual range, really. We then started to test in driving from within a moving vehicle. This is when things got really, really difficult and interesting. Started out doing some general driving the vehicle from a moving vehicle, so cruising down at 50 miles an hour, driving side by side, just to get a feel for how it is driving from the seating position, how it looks visually out the window, and also controlling the car with a few less senses than you're normally used to having. So a lot of the time you can hear your car, but driving it from inside a moving vehicle, you don't really get to see. You only have vision. That's all you've got. Once we were familiar with driving the car from within a moving vehicle, we actually tried some simulated drag races. 3, 2, 1, go! After the first launch and initial drag race down the quarter mile that we marked out, there were two very bizarre feelings that I got. One is that how incredibly fast the RC car was. The ARRMA Infraction took off like a rocket, and we're travelling in a fast full-size car, and the ARRMA Infraction is just gapping us completely. It's just going. The second thing that is really bizarre is that at one moment I was watching the car and I actually forgot I was driving it. It's not a normal situation to be in, driving a car from a real car. I was watching the car go, gapping along, and I had a realization, oh, I'm driving that car. I've got to do something, I'm driving that car. So yeah, it took a few runs to get used to the driving of a car from a moving car. It's ridiculous.
Actually, it doesn't feel like I'm driving it. I feel like I'm watching it, I'm not driving it. Right, if you slow down, I'll turn it back and drive it.
It's like a video game, man.
Yeah.
In designing the car, we wanted our tyres to be good enough to be able to do this sort of run, so I don't think we're worried by the speed.
The tyres we used for the event and all of our testing was just the stock Hunds tyres on the ARRMA Infraction. All through our testing, all through the development of that project, we've always found them to be incredibly reliable. The tyre works just perfectly.
It was going to be a race of two halves. We'd gap it, we knew that from the testing. but would we gap it enough? Yeah, we turned up on the day pretty early because it's filming day. We were all prepped, unloaded, put everything out the side of the car, and then watched some quite fast cars turning up.
Carwow then explained that we'd actually be up against the Audi R8 V10, as well as a racing drone and also the G63 AMG. The Audi R8 and the drone were a slight curveball for us. We weren't sure what we were racing. We knew it was going to be a G63. The other ones weren't exactly clear.
Looking back now, it was a fun race. Suddenly, yeah, actually this is going to be really good fun.
Preparing to race, sat in the passenger seat of the G63, having the microphone put on my collar, all the cameras rolling, the door shuts, and then you realise it's happening. I'm sat there on a runway in a $150,000 car with my ARRMA Infraction next to it and a ridiculously expensive Audi R8 next to that as well. About to do a quarter-mile drag race. Things get real really quickly.
What you see on the video is first take, only take, no cutting. That's how the race was, and it was really good.
What Carwow usually do for their car comparison videos is a drag race, a rolling race from 50 miles an hour, and then a brake taste race from 70 miles an hour. As I understood it, I thought we were just doing a drag race. I thought it'd be a special edition, kind of crazy drag race. But after we did the drag race, Matt then said to me, okay, now we're doing the rolling race and then we do the brake test. And it's like, oh, okay, we'll see if it works. We've not tested any of this stuff. I'm sure it'll be fine. The countdown begins. The Audi's in launch control, the G63's on the throttle and on the brakes, ready to go. I'm poised, ready for the go. As soon as the lady says go, I pull the trigger and then we're off.
So who won?
Well, who did win? You've got to go to the Carwow website and watch the video.
I'm not going to give it all away. If you want to see how the ARRMA Infraction stacked up against the competition, then check out the official Carwow video. If you want to see an ARRMA Limitless featured on Carwow, then tell Carwow what car they need to bring to beat that car.
ARRMA RC. Designed fast, designed tough.